It's definitely fall here in Virginia and the weather's getting really nice for camping. So I figured I'd do a video on how to find a great camping spot and how to do a little bit of research in making sure that it's safe and reliable. Camping can be such a fun experience. It's a way to get out, sort of be on vacation, but not spending a lot of money, because a lot of times these campsites are free or just a few dollars a night. So it really is a great way to just get away from it all and spend a couple nights outside under the stars having a campfire. Whether you're planning to drive into a campground or hike into a backcountry site, it's hard to know what exactly you're getting into before you actually get to the location. But I've done this enough times now to have a better understanding of what sorts of things to look for as I'm researching my campsites. So the first thing to keep in mind is just the different types of agencies that you might want to look at when you're looking up your campsites. So you've got the National Park Service, you've got your state park agency, you've got some regional and local parks near you probably. You also have national forest lands that often offer camping grounds, and you'll have BLM campgrounds, which is Bureau of Land Management. Now, none of these agencies sort of cohere with one another when you're looking up where you want to camp. So you might be looking at a campground at a national park, and right nearby is a campground for a national forest, but you're not going to see, if you're looking at the national park campgrounds, you're not going to necessarily see that national forest campground. So you have to keep in mind, if you do see a national forest near the national park that you're going to, take a look at their website and see what camping options they have. Which of these type of campgrounds you choose is going to depend on what sort of atmosphere suits you best when you're camping. Do you want a large campground with bathhouses and a lot of other people around? Or do you want something more in the backcountry where you're hiking in or just driving into a remote road and just popping up a tent? Oftentimes these agencies that I've mentioned will have big campgrounds that you pay to get into, and you sort of park your car somewhere and pop the tent right next to the car. You'll often find dozens to hundreds of campsites at each of these campgrounds, so expect a lot of other people there, but it does have some security in that, there are going to be other people around you. You're going to have amenities such as toilets and potentially bathhouses and things like that. Often, though, these agencies will also have options for what's called dispersed camping, or sometimes backcountry camping. So backcountry camping is really, hiking into a campsite that might be miles into the wilderness, and you're probably not going to find other people there. So that's one that definitely, if you want to just be isolated in your camping experience, definitely look into the backcountry options. But there are also dispersed camping options that are just right off of roadways, that you go down a gravel road for several miles or something, and you find a campsite by the road, basically. And that's a great option too if you don't have time, or you don't want to hike way into the wilderness and you want the option of getting back in your car if something happens. That's another way to make your camping experience more safe. Here's a bit of a warning though. Just because one of these agencies has a designated campground or a designated campsite doesn't necessarily mean that that place is going to be safe and reliable for you to camp at. Its intended purpose is for you to camp there, but sometimes these places can be a little bit sketchy or a little bit isolated, and you might not like that. There's some things you're just not going to know until you get there, but you can do a little bit more research and digging by looking at satellite maps of the location to try to figure out what your campsite is actually going to be looking like. Sometimes it's completely covered by trees and you can't tell a single thing, but it might give you some indication just of what the terrain looks like, what the roadways look like near there, just to give you a better idea of what you're going to be getting into. And make sure you read everything that the agency has to say about that campsite. It might only be open for a certain portion of the summer season. It might close in the winter time. I've had this happen. If you saw my South Dakota video recently, we showed up to a campground that, unbeknownst to us, was closed for the winter. And there wasn't really any indication of that online before we went. So that was a situation where we had planned on camping at this big campground, and I had looked at satellite imagery. I had seen where the campground was. It looked fine. And then we got there and it was just completely shut down. You couldn't get into it. So we had to regroup, and luckily I did have a backup option in mind. You might also want to look up, how far the nearest town is, how far the nearest emergency services are. These are all just things, just making sure that you're going to be safe for the night. One thing you'll also want to think about is some places don't allow campfires. For me, having a campfire is a big part of the experience of camping in general, so I like to find places that will allow a campfire if possible. You just want to keep that in mind when you're looking up your campsites to see, are you going to be able to have a fire? And if you are, think about bringing in firewood or, collecting firewood when you're in the area. Well, that's all I have for this video. Let me know if this was helpful. I hope it motivated you to go camping for a weekend. And if you have any other tips on how to find a great campsite, let me know in the comments. See ya.